Welcome to my Witchcraft History series. I feel it is important to share the knowledge and the wisdom of the history of witchcraft. So I put together this video series. If you like this video and want to delve into more information, please subscribe to my channel. The Witch of Endor is what I'm going into right now. The Hebrew view of witches and witchcraft was influenced more by the more negative Babylonian attitude than the Egyptian one. And through the translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, Latin, and ultimately English and other cultural tongues, this negative worldview of witchcraft was to have a huge impact on later Western approaches towards witches and witchcraft. The various translations of Hebrew words to do with magic, sorcery, and witchcraft in the Bible will be covered later. It is worth noticing that the notorious version of Exodus 22:18 that states, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," is actually inaccurate and probably deliberately so. Rendering of the original Hebrew, which referred to a poisoner or someone doing evil magic. The best known witch story of the Old Testament, the Witch of Endor, from 1 Samuel, is also a misleading translation. The word witch is used in English versions when the Hebrew writer was really referring to a seer or woman who divined the future. In the story itself, set in the 11th century BC, King Saul of Israel is terrified of a forthcoming battle with an army of Philistines and feels abandoned by God. In desperation, he goes in disguise to see the woman or witch to help him know the future. Interesting. The text refers to the woman's initial fears at helping the visitor. She points out that Saul has banished mediums and spiritualists from the land. After reassurances, the woman calls up at Saul's request the spirit of the dead prophet Samuel, whom the king recognizes. Saul asks Samuel what to do. The prophet, who seems unhappy at being disturbed, confirms that the king has indeed was deserted by God. He then predicts that Saul and his sons will die the next day after defeat at the hands of the Philistines. The prediction proves correct, and Saul's 3 sons are killed by the Philistines, and the wounded king eventually takes his own life. In later times, many Christians thought that the conjured spirit could not have been Samuel and was therefore the work of the devil. This is another example of how, from the first interpretation of an apparently straightforward story, Christians came to regard anyone practicing witchcraft as being in the league with the diabolical. The attitude of the so-called Witch of Endor when she is initially asked to conjure up a spirit, is fearful. Her rejections suggested in the Hebrew society that people such as mystics, seers, and necromancers were regarded with some mistrust. Yet one of the greatest magicians or witches of all time was himself, King of Israel, Solomon, the son of David. Solomon's greater wisdom is well known, especially as depicted in the famous story of how he ruled in a custody dispute that the child concerned should be cut in half, and this produced a reaction from the real mother. That wisdom was, according to the Hebrew Bible, a gift to Solomon from a grateful God. There are, though, two significant points about Solomon that impact on the history of witchcraft. The first, as already mentioned, is that he was renowned as a great magician. Solomon is said to have commanded a legion of devils to help build his famous and fabulous temple, in which he housed the Ark of the Covenant. His power over the demons apparently came from a magic ring given to Solomon by God himself, by an angel. Solomon is also thought to have consulted witches for advice. Solomon's reputation as a magician, that he is credited with writing the greatest of the grimoires, the book of magical spells and rituals known as the Key of Solomon. However, though the origins of the key stretch back many centuries, and there's no evidence that he wrote such a book. The other important point about Solomon is that, according to the Old Testament, he worshipped other gods. Now Solomon, reputed, had many wives, 700 in all, and a small master of 300 concubines. He was also married to the daughter of the Pharaoh of Egypt. This was a handy diplomatic arrangement that kept his land safe from his more powerful neighbor. Solomon allowed these most foreign partners to worship their own gods. And Solomon himself, according to 1 Kings 11, also worships some of them. One of these was Ashtoreth. Ashtoreth, also known as Astarte, or Astarte, was a goddess of the Canaanites, or who occupied the land between the Mediterranean Sea and Dead Sea before the Israelites conquered it. She was the equivalent of Ishtar and was known as the Queen of Heaven. She was worshipped by some early Hebrews, and in at least one location, a temple to her and the Hebrew god Yahweh were built side by side. Like Isis, Ashtoreth was often depicted with cow or bull horns, and by some as a mother holding a child. Some of Solomon's powers of magic were said to have helped him build his famous temple. Using a magic ring, he was able to command demons to carry out its construction. Solomon's worship of gods other than Yahweh did not cause his death, but the Hebrew God was displeased and promised to dismantle Solomon's empire in later years, which he did. In an interesting, it is interesting that Solomon had been given great wisdom by one God and chose to use it in part to worship others from an even older tradition. As we have seen, the Sumerians had a demon known as Lilith. The equivalent in Hebrew culture was Lilith. She too was depicted as a demon of the night, flying out to strangle or kidnap newborn children or sleeping with men to produce demonic children. Lilith is reputed to have been the first wife of Adam. The two of them have been physically joined as twins. However, the couple once created soon fell out. Adam insisted that during sex, he lie underneath him. Lilith demanded her equal rights, and when Adam refused, Lilith went off in anger and gave birth to children from demons. God sent 3 angels after her, and they caught up with her at the Red Sea, but she refused to go back. Her punishment was that every day she would lose 100 of the demonic children that she produced. Lilith's reaction to her punishment was to wage war against the newborn, though she could be warded off by amulets bearing the names of the 3 angels who pursued her. The practice of guarding newborn babies against Lilith using an amulet and or a magic circle persisted until the 18th century. In the Zohar, which is the main source of the Jewish mystical tradition, the Kabbalah, it is said that Lilith's greatest power is when the moon is waning. This quality associates her with the crone aspect of the goddess referred to above, the dark side. The negative qualities given to Lilith were, like those of Lilitu, later connected with the Middle Ages concept of the diabolical witch. Lilith has been championed as an important mythological character by feminists who see in her refusal to comply with Adam's demands and subsequent punishment a parable of how a society repressed woman. One more mystical interpretation of the Lilith-Adam story, and one that also feeds into modern witchcraft, is that Lilith represents a wild, passionate, subconscious side of the human spirit. Adam represents civilization trying and failing to control his wild subconscious. The two are set in opposition. In this interpretation, modern witchcraft is trying to bring these two elements into harmony and balance. Eve was said to have been the second of Adam's 2 partners. The first was Lilith, who went off in rage after being denied equal status with her male companion. The evil, bonding figure of the devil did not exist in all religions and cultures, but developed gradually in Judaism and became an important character in Christianity. Western culture is now familiar with the idea of the devil, the negative counterpart to the one true God, the evil one who ruled even evil demons and tried to turn humanity away from the path of righteousness. However, not all religions and cultures develop this idea, and in quite this way. Many religions had one deity or a series of gods and goddesses who collectively represented both light and darkness. Good and bad were rolled into one. The development of Mazism, The faith based on the teachings of the Persian prophet Zoroaster from 1638 to 553 BC saw a different approach to the world. In this religion, the good God was in conflict with the evil God. This good versus evil notion influenced Judaism and later had a huge influence on Christian thinking. In the Old Testament, the development of Satan as his personification of an evil force was gradual. Satan, the Hebrew word for this force, simply meant adversary or the obstructor. But during the age of the apocalyptic writings from around 200 BC to 150 AD, Satan became a more defined figure in Hebrew thought. The devil in Judaism became a tangible figure of the dark, set in opposition to the light and to God. He was to them a fallen angel. In Judaism, this heavy emphasis on the devil began to dwindle from the 1st century BC onward, as rabbinic Judaism came to the force. The rabbis paid less heed to the literal interpretation of the devil. However, it is during this period of apocalyptic writing that Christianity developed its own tradition and beliefs. The idea of the devil functioned as a counterbalance to Christ. Christ was here to save you from the devil. It was the ultimate good versus the ultimate evil. For Christians, it was not only an effective way of defining who they were and who they were not, but was also an extremely effective way of recruiting new people. For in the Christian universe, you could not sit on the theological fence if you didn't join the solution of Jesus Christ. Then you were part of the problem, the devil. This philosophy had implications for witches and witchcraft. The Christian reasoning was as follows. First, you could not order an angel, a good spirit, to perform a task or grant a wish. You could only pray to it. Therefore, those people, the witches, who did invoke spirit, were by definition calling up bad spirits. Since these bad spirits were obviously being controlled by the devil, then anyone calling up the spirits was in league with the devil and would inevitably be controlled by him. This reasoning was the background to much of the Christian-inspired persecution of witches in later Western culture. It is still quite prevalent today among many Christian fundamentalists. The devil or Satan was associated in the Christian world with darkness, death, and decay, and eventually became linked to witchcraft and witches. I hope you enjoyed this audio and found it interesting or learned something new from it. If you did enjoy this audio, subscribe to my channel and check out my next video on the history of witchcraft. Have a great day. Many blessings to you. Bye-bye.